Hello, Siegfried here. So the topic of this video, the long topic of the video, is does being on the road give you a different view of events? And this question comes from my friend Philip. Well, I think it's a good question, and I think the answer is yes. Certainly it can give you a different view of events. When you go out to a place, there's a number of things that are unique about that experience. One is just the emotional experience of being somewhere. It's like one thing I found is it was very hard to capture the feeling of being at the Grand Canyon in a picture from the Grand Canyon. Now I could take a picture and you can go, wow, that looks beautiful, I'd like to see that. And yeah, it does a pretty good job telling you that it's beautiful and it's very interesting, but actually being there is a whole other level of awe and grandeur and just an intrinsic feeling about what it means to be in this space. So if you have not been to the Grand Canyon, you cannot truly know what it was like for the early explorers, be they Native Americans or early American explorers, seeing this place for the first time and just having their minds blown by the incredible beauty of what they're seeing, just how amazing it is. So I think there's definitely something about both a historical place and a real place, a natural place, going there, seeing it, that gives you an emotional response that puts you in a connection with the people who had been there in the past and the stories about that place. So I think that's pretty important. Also, I mean, in some cases, let's say you go visit a Civil War battlefield, something we did a number of times. You get to see the layout of the terrain. You can really imagine what it would be like to be in this valley surrounded by enemy forces, or you're looking up a slope that somehow soldiers climbed while being shot at, and the mind just boggles. You know, you read it on a piece of paper, it sounds pretty bad, but you're there and you're like, that looks impossible. So being at the location gives you this kind of insight and perspective that you wouldn't otherwise have. Another way that's interesting is you're going to see a lot of details that if you read a story or get somebody else's perspective, they're going to clip it down. They're going to make it not boring. They're not going to put in all the details that you could experience there. But if you go in person, you can take your time, hours and hours and hours of looking at things, touching things, and it's going to give you a whole different perspective. Like the Mount Rushmore here. I mean, everybody knows these famous bases. But if you've been to Mount Rushmore and you've done some exploring, you know they've got a museum, and there's all sorts of other monuments on this site. There's a big monument about westward expansion. That was really the vision that the Mount Rushmore was supposed to kind of promote, was this expansion of the American over the whole country. And unfortunately, that also involved the displacement of all the people who already lived there. And when you can see the mindset of the people who built it and their understanding of what it means. And that's something you might not get with somebody else's tale about Mount Rushmore. Maybe they will talk about it. I think I talk about it a little bit in my blog. But maybe they won't. Maybe they'll just talk about the faces and you'll learn about the history of the president. So when you go by yourself, you get to decide what parts of the experience are important to you, what you're going to get into, and how you're going to view these events by being there. Now, I think, of course, the most amazing thing is to be at a place while history is happening there. That's going to give you a perspective that everybody else is going to want to hear, and you're going to have a unique insight into the feeling of the time, the place of the time. Another thing that was interesting as I was traveling, as I got a little better perspective for the way other Americans live, and that gives me a better perspective into their political alignment. I mean, politics is something I get into a lot, but I lived in the West Coast, up in Anchorage, Alaska, and then Seattle, Washington most of my life. It has a particular political climate. It's pretty liberal and it's pretty urban. You don't think of Alaska as urban, but where I lived, it's an urban culture. However, when you get out into rural America, just being in the place and watching the lives of people there gives you some perspective into what is important to them, what their needs are, what their concerns are, and it will help you understand the way they view the role of, say, government compared to somebody who lives in a big urban city. You really don't need the government so much. When you live out near the wilderness, or you got a farm or something like that, you don't understand the need for all these rules to keep people from getting in each other's business and causing a lot of chaos. you live in a big city, you really understand that we're going to need some rules to make this cooperation work, and you're going to have some controls, because one person can kind of ruin the whole scene. But you're out in the country, you don't care what the guy on the next farm is doing. Well, why should you? And why should they care what you're doing? And so it's going to give you a much better perspective into kind of a baseline level of political viewpoints. And then you're going to be able to talk to those people a little bit, argue your points, and understand that maybe you shouldn't be imposing everything that you think is good on somebody who lives a very different lifestyle. So there are incredible benefits from traveling, being on the road, and experiencing life in different settings and different situations. And there's just something special about being able to go, see, touch, feel the wind, all that kind of thing. Well, I hope I've inspired you to go out and live some of these kinds of experiences, because I think that's the best thing I can do for anybody. All right, well, that's it for this topic. Thanks, Philip. Bye-bye.